Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at how a simple list of words, a stopwatch, and one man's very strange answers managed to crack open a brand new window into the human mind.
So let's just dive right into that question. To answer it, we've got to go back, way back, to the turn of the 20th century. This was a time when the human mind was like the new frontier. These were the early, really exciting days of experimental psychology, when brilliant researchers truly believed that a simple list of words could be the key to unlocking its deepest, most hidden secrets. You know, our story actually begins not with a word, but with a medical puzzle. Doctors were wrestling with this problem. How could you objectively identify a condition like epilepsy, not just by its obvious physical seizures, but by the very personality of the patient? See, at the time, psychiatry had this concept they called the epileptic character. The idea was that people with epilepsy shared a specific, identifiable personality profile. We're talking traits like a really slow, meticulous way of thinking, a very strong egocentricity, everything's about them, and a tendency toward moodiness. For a psychiatrist back in 1904, spotting this character was almost as important as actually seeing a seizure happen. But, the problem is obvious, right? Personality is subjective. You can't exactly measure moodiness with a ruler. It's hard to pin down in a lab. So researchers desperately needed a more precise, a more scientific tool to get an objective look at what was really going on inside the mind. And the tool they landed on was the word association test. It was a new and, as it turns out, an incredibly powerful way to start exploring the hidden pathways and all the tangled connections of human thought. The concept itself is just beautifully simple. A researcher says a word, like head or green, and you have to respond with the very first word that pops into your head, as fast as you can. But the real genius of the test wasn't just what people said, it was also the timing. The seconds, even the fractions of a second it took someone to answer, that reaction time, that could reveal all sorts of hidden emotional baggage and subconscious roadblocks. So now let's meet the subject of our investigation. This is a man whose responses to this very simple test were so unusual, so strange, that they became the foundation for this entire groundbreaking analysis. This is M. Joseph. He was a 41-year-old toolmaker, and his backstory is really important here. After his wife died, his life just completely spiraled. He started wandering, there was some theft, and he ended up in and out of hospitals. His official diagnosis was a mental deficiency, but it was all seen through the lens of that epileptic character we were just talking about. Okay, now let's get into the good stuff. Let's look at his actual responses from the 1904 study. Take the word song. A typical response might be something simple, right? Like music or bird. But from the very first word, it was crystal clear that M. Joseph's mind worked differently. So the researcher says, song. Joseph doesn't respond with one word. He gives a whole phrase. To sing a song. And just look at that reaction time. Over 6 seconds. That is an eternity for such a simple word. And this wasn't a fluke. Oh no. This pattern of giving these elaborate, almost sentence-long answers, just packed with extra explanation, it continued through the entire test. This one just brilliantly illustrates his whole tendency. To the word air, he doesn't just respond. He defines it, he qualifies it, he evaluates it. This is the air, nature's air, healthy or unhealthy, fresh air is fresh air. He's going so far beyond what the test is even asking for. So what on earth did these bizarre answers actually mean? What was this strange pattern revealing about the way M. Joseph's mind was wired? Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. On the right, you've got typical responses from other subjects who also had mental deficiencies. They're impersonal, almost like they're reciting a lesson from school. But then, look at M. Joseph on the left. His responses were intensely egocentric. Notice how often he uses the word I, and how he constantly pulls every abstract idea back to his own feelings, his own state of being. It was the first major clue. His need to be understood was almost physical. You have to picture this. To the word wide, he not only gives this totally redundant definition, this is the width of a distance, but the original report actually notes that he made an explanatory gesture, literally showing the width with his hands. So this wasn't just him being helpful. The researcher identified it as an unnecessary and exaggerated tendency to elaborate. This intense, almost desperate need to be perfectly and completely understood was seen as real, quantifiable evidence of that fussiness of thought they believed was part of the epileptic character.
But believe it or not, M. Joseph's strange sentences were only half the story. The biggest discovery, the real bombshell of the entire case, was hidden not in the words themselves, but in the silent seconds ticking away between them.
When they looked at the raw data of his reaction times, there was a deeper mystery. The longest delays weren't after the hard, abstract words, which is what you'd expect. Instead, the spikes in time seemed to just pop up randomly. But when the researcher looked closer, a pattern started to emerge. They almost always happened after emotionally charged words.
So the researcher came up with this stunning hypothesis. For M. Joseph, the emotional hit of a word wasn't immediate. Think of it like a delayed echo. An emotional word comes in, like tired, he gives his answer, and only after he speaks does the emotional disturbance actually build up. It's like this emotional wave that crests late and then spills over, completely disrupting his ability to respond to the very next word on the list.
And the data, well, the data was the proof. This chart is just incredible. Look at the bar on the far left. That's the average reaction for a normal, uncomplicated word, 3.8 seconds. Okay, now look at the bar on the far right. This is the reaction time for a totally neutral word that just happens to come after an emotionally charged one. It spikes to 5.8 seconds. That's a full 2-second delay caused by the previous word's emotional hangover. The echo was real, and for the very first time, it was measurable.
This was the big aha moment. The researcher gave it a name, a perseverating feeling tone, basically a lingering emotional state. This was it, a quantifiable, objective signature of how emotion was processed differently in this one patient's mind, hitting late and then fading away very, very slowly. So let's pull back for a second. What's the real takeaway here? What's the lasting significance of this one incredibly detailed look into one man's mind from over a century ago?
Well, the final analysis boiled it down to 3 key peculiarities that really defined this specific epileptic character. First, his clumsy but intense need to over-explain everything. Second, his blunt and totally egocentric emotional references. And third, most importantly, that critical delayed emotional echo, the perseverating feeling tone.
In the end, this pioneering study was about so much more than just diagnosing one man. It was one of the very first times we looked through a new kind of keyhole, proving that simple, quantifiable data could actually begin to map the vast, complex territory of an individual mind. It gave us a glimpse of the hidden architecture of thought, and it leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today. What new keyholes are we finding now, and what secrets are they just waiting to reveal?